morning of 11th of March 1918 began like so many before it for the first Australian tunnelling company. Men underground at Béthune, Loos and the Hill 70 sector, repairing galleries, checking timbers, listening for German counter-miners. The war diary records that at 6:30 a.m, the enemy began heavy gas shelling on the forward areas. At first, officers thought it was routine harassment fire, but the bombardment intensified and the shells began bursting in rapid succession, releasing a thick, oily vapour that settled close to the ground. The appendix describes it plainly. Gas shelling in the vicinity of the working shifts. Men began to feel effects of gas, eyesight affected, coughing, collapsing. The German shells contain mustard gas, far deadlier than chlorine or phosgene, and the first Australian tunnelling company, scattered across dugouts and galleries, were caught in the open and below ground at the same time. Men emerging from shafts walked straight into the invisible clouds. Others underground felt it slide down the gallery roofs and collect at their feet. Mustard gas is heavier than air. Those who inhaled it must have felt the effects, perhaps even hours later. But for many, the symptoms appeared very quickly, including burning eyes, tightening throats, and the sensation of sand scraping inside the lungs. A sergeant reported that several miners had staggered back from their posts, their uniforms already absorbing the agent. But masks, efficient in open air, were nearly useless inside a tunnel. Moisture, sweat, and a thick gas film clogged filters. Men working shirtless underground had exposed skin. Those at the tunnel lips had no room to retreat. At 7 a.m, casualty numbers began rising sharply. The war diary shows the company evacuating men to the Moore dressing station, then to the Canadian clearing station. But as the day progressed, the number of casualties became overwhelming. Mustard gas can be deceptive. Many men felt normal for a time after exposure. They cleaned tools, ate breakfast, even resumed work. But as the morning turned to afternoon, the company's internal tally sheet, that faint penciled grid, shows the crisis accelerating. 10th of March, 112 affected. 11th of March, 122 affected. 12th of March, 444 affected. 13th of March, 596 affected. These were not new attacks, they were delayed symptoms from the same bombardment. Men's eyes began to swell shut. Skin reddened, then blistered. Lungs filled with fluid. Voices grew hoarse, then disappeared entirely. Some collapsed hours after, insisting they were fine. This was the moment Albert began to deteriorate. We do not know the exact minute, but we know the symptom profile. Blind for 12 days, lost his voice for over a month, skin burns, chronic respiratory trauma. These match the pattern of tunnellers caught in the second wave escalation. Men who inhaled enough mustard gas to cause deep tissue injury, but not enough to kill at once. Imagine the scene. Albert, eyes burning, unable to keep them open, his voice reduced to a rasp, then a whisper, then nothing. His skin erupting in painful blisters, his chest filling with the slow fire that mustard gas ignites from within. A lieutenant wrote in an appendix, men showed signs not at once apparent, voices failing, eyesight worsening, cases became serious gradually. And this is exactly what happened to Albert. By midday, stretcher bearers were moving continuously. The Moore dressing station overflowed. The consolidation point was full. The casualty clearing line ran out the door and into the mud. Officers reported that 40 men were evacuated immediately, but hundreds more were admitted in the next 72 hours as the gas ate deeper into their lungs and eyes. In one of the appendices, a typed list reveals the enormity of the attack. 56 miners evacuated in the first report. Over 300 additional cases identified as the effects progressed. Officers, NCOs and tunnellers all affected. Men from several working parties knocked out at once. From the records, it seems that this was one of the largest single incident gas casualty events suffered by an Australian engineering unit in 1918. The War Diary's final March notes are sombre. Work severely reduced, men suffering, numbers unfit for duty. The first tunnelling company, already thinly spread, was crippled. Dozens of its best miners were temporarily blinded. Others could not speak above a whisper. Some died. Many never returned to full health. Albert Edwards would carry the consequences for the rest of his life. In this picture from the Australian War Memorial, showing sapper Arthur Leslie Hodder, he was a 32-year-old labourer from New South Wales, South Bowenfells. This portrait shows a young man with a steady gaze, the kind of composure common amongst the tunnellers. Men who understood hard work before they understood war. Hodder enlisted in March 1916 and joined the tunnelling companies soon after. Like many of the tunnellers, he wasn't a miner by trade, just a man who knew the weight of a shovel, the rhythm of labour, the feel of earth under his boots. He sailed on the HMAT Warilda in 1916 and found himself, as Albert later would, in the shattered landscapes around Ypres. This was not just a battlefield, it was a place where the ground itself was unstable, cratered, and threaded with tunnels that could collapse at any moment. On 19th September 1917 near Ypres, Arthur Hodder was killed in action. He was buried at the Menin Road South Military Cemetery, one of thousands of Australians whose names now line the Menin Gate, read every night in a ritual that continues to this day. His death reminds us how deadly the work of the tunnelling companies truly was. Their war was fought in darkness, with little visibility, no margin for error, and constant danger from explosives, collapse and counter-mining. The young men who went down into the earth did so knowing that if something went wrong, there would be no time to escape. Albert served in the same company. He worked in the same chalk and clay, breathed the same damp air and faced the same risks. The fact that he later survived mustard gas but Hodder never saw 1918 underscores the thin, unpredictable line between life and death in the underground war. Once the scale of the gas attack became clear, the priority shifted from tunnelling to survival. The War Diary shows that all remaining work at the Loos and Hill 70 galleries ceased. The unit was effectively withdrawn from active mining duties, not because of enemy success underground, but because the company no longer had the strength to continue. For men like Albert, the first obstacle was simply reaching daylight. Some walked out with their eyes swollen shut, guided by others holding their sleeves. Others had to be pulled out of shafts, unable to breathe or speak. The diary notes the nearest triage point, the Moor dressing station. Immediately overwhelmed, filled with men coughing blood, rubbing their faces raw or collapsing without warning. Here, orderlies applied anti-gas ointment, saline eye baths, strips of bandage around blistered skin, morphine for the worst burns and respiratory distress. But the station was really built for wounds, not hundreds of simultaneous chemical casualties. Within hours, the overflow was moved. The appendices detail where the serious cases went next, the Canadian Casualty Clearing Station. This was the first point with real medical capability. Proper decontamination, oxygen, anti-inflammatory treatment, dark rooms for temporary or total blindness, and early attempts to limit lung damage. One report records 40 men evacuated immediately, then more than 300 over the following days. Casualties continued to worsen as mustard gas symptoms developed slowly, but relentlessly. The CCS reports list classifications: evacuated to base hospital, seriously ill, eyesight impaired, respiratory involvement. And Albert's medical record places him in the highest category: severe ocular burns, loss of voice, extensive blistering and respiratory trauma. These were the sort of men the CCS sent further back. From the CCS, the worst hit were moved by motor ambulance, train ambulance, and sometimes even horse ambulance. These journeys were long, jarring, and obviously could make symptoms even worse. At the base hospital, men remained for weeks and months, depending on eye damage and lung scarring. Mustard gas injuries were notorious for late complications, including corneal ulcers, chronic bronchitis, vocal cord paralysis, chemical pneumonia, and skin infections in blister sites. Albert's medical board entries reflect all of these. The March 1918 diary entries after the attack show that the first tunnelling company was recording high casualty numbers daily and had suspended most forward trench work, moving surviving men to restable areas. Work was also reorganised due to a lack of manpower, and healthy men were redirected to non-mining duties. This was effectively a temporary withdrawal. The company could not continue underground operations with half its force incapacitated. This is the context in which Albert disappeared into the medical system. One man among hundreds, but with injuries severe enough to sideline him for months. Mustard gas had no antidote. Treatment was entirely supportive and often experimental. Iced saline for blistered eyes, atropine for airway spasms, menthol oil to reduce coughing, milk, eggs and alkaline drinks for throat damage, cod liver oil for skin healing, and isolation wards for those with severe respiratory burns. The medical board notation that he was blind for 12 days and voiceless for over a month confirms the intensity of the exposure. And when he could see again, when he could finally speak, he was still not the same man. After the gas attack, Alphonsus never returned directly to tunnelling. His lungs were scarred, his vision was unreliable, his voice came and went in a rasp. But he was not discharged. The AIF didn't send men home lightly, especially in 19 with the German Spring Offensive underway. Instead, men like Alphonsus were reclassified, not as combat tunnellers but as general duties, doing the work that kept the front from collapsing. But light duty was a polite phrase. It didn't mean rest. It meant service without a rifle. Men with damaged lungs could carry messages. Men with eye injuries could tally stores. Men who could no longer dig repaired roads, unloaded wagons, built revetments, or acted as batman officers. The war diary for March and April 1918 shows the company shifting into defensive engineering, falling back from Loos and Hill 70 and taking up work miles behind the lines. repairing communication trenches, constructing splinter-proof shelters, maintaining observation posts, moving mine equipment to safer sectors, assisting with gas-proofing dugouts, and clearing abandoned material during the retreat. This was the world Albert was returned to, still dangerous, still essential, but not the hell of underground warfare. Medical boards note that he struggled with breathlessness, had recurring conjunctivitis and blurred vision, suffered chronic hoarseness and throat scarring, and had painful chemical burns that reopened in cold weather. And yet he was kept on strength. This tells us something about 1918. The AIF needed every man who could stand, walk, and carry even modest loads. Thousands of similarly injured soldiers, gash casualties, trench fever cases, men with healed fractures, became the quiet labour force of the final year of the war. If you imagine Albert in these months, imagine something like this: standing sentry outside a depot hut, wrapped in a greatcoat, coughing into a handkerchief, stacking timber and duckboards for working parties, helping to maintain billets as the unit shifted locations, recording numbers of picks, shovels, lamps and helmets issued to active tunnellers, moving with the company during the Allied counter-push, but kept out of direct combat, acting as a messenger when his breathing allowed it. He wasn't restored to full strength, he was used at the level available. We often talk about battlefield heroism, the charge, the rescue under fire, the tunneler digging until the gallery collapses. But there is another kind of courage, the man who keeps showing up after the war has already taken his health. Albert was only 22 years old. Most of his peers who were gassed as severely were sent home. He stayed. That quiet perseverance is its own form of heroism, the kind that rarely appears in histories, but is everywhere in the margins of the war diaries. This photograph from the Australian War Memorial shows members of the 1st Australian Tunnelling Company repairing a shattered water main in a recaptured French village. Civilians stand around watching, men who have returned to ruins, relying on the tunnellers not just for military engineering, but for the basic elements of daily life. By late 1918, the German army was in retreat and the war above ground was changing. But the work of the tunnellers did not stop. They were engineers as much as miners, restoring roads, rebuilding culverts, repairing wells and drainage, keeping water flowing for both troops and civilians. These were the kinds of duties that men recovering from injury could perform, and they were critical to stabilising the liberated villages of northern France. For Albert, still physically weakened by mustard gas, this was the world he re-entered between hospital stays. Muddy streets, broken pipes, damaged infrastructure, and a population emerging slowly from years of occupation. It is a reminder that tunnellers were not solely agents of destruction, but also agents of repair, helping communities begin again amongst the wreckage. While recovering in England, Albert met Elsie Agnes Austin, a young woman from Birmingham, with a difficult childhood that had been marked by poverty and instability. Their meeting on a leave visit to relatives of his Maitland neighbours became a story of love at first sight. Their wedding in Harborne in Birmingham in 1919 symbolised a new beginning. For him, life beyond injury. For her, hope beyond hardship. Their union becomes the bridge to episode 4. By the time Albert sailed home to Australia in 1920 with Elsie, he carried scars from underground labour, permanent respiratory damage, weakened eyesight and reduced work capacity, chronic illness, and the psychological burden of underground combat. The war had not ended for Albert, It had simply changed form. In the next episode, we follow what happened after the fighting stopped. The struggle of gas casualties to rebuild lives, the weight placed on war brides, the coming impact of the Great Depression, and then the next generation's own call to service during the Second World War.